and the quality of education in Africa. He's been involved in educational technology since 2002, quite a long time ago. In addition to educational technologies, our keynote speaker's other interests are in the area of digital innovation, digital enterprise, and business intelligence. Guess who am I talking about? Our keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. James Njenga. Over to you, my brother.
Good morning. I see I've been gifted with a tablet. Whose is it? Okay, first I would like to thank MUT, Dr. Mukua, for the introduction, and also for welcoming us, and also restating that we welcome even if we come from other parts of the world. Like I do. I come from Kenya. We came from Kenya about 15 years ago, and I settled in Cape Town, and that's where I've been for the 15 years. So it's been mentioned that I've been dealing with educational technology since 2002, and as a matter of fact, I got into educational technology almost by accident. In my final year computer science at the University of Nairobi, my promoter happened to be writing his PhD on educational technology, and he needed somebody who could program or write a small program, a small LMS, so that he can test his ideas. And I don't know whether I was a good programmer or I didn't have another topic, so I went to it, and since then, I've been in the field, both in research and working as a technologist, learning technologist, an instructional designer, and full-time researcher in the field. So since 2002, I've seen how technology has grown, and by technology here I just mean the electronic technology. But that's not to say other technologies are not growing. But what I think has not changed is our understanding of educational technology. What is educational technology? If we left here and asked ourselves, what do we understand educational technology to be? What is it? Is it something that we know but we can't explain? Or is it something that we know and we use it often? So, like I do in every lecture, I'll start by defining technology, or educational technology for that matter. But before I get there, I want us to link some aspects, technology and society. About 3 years ago, I was teaching at a course on education, technology and society with a focus on information systems and information technology. And I was looking with my students what it means to use technology and how involuntarily we use technology, we consume technology without actually realizing that we're using technology. And sometimes we oppose the use of technology even when we use technology. So, for example, one of the things that we so much opposed to, at least some of us, is artificial intelligence. That we don't want a computer that makes decisions on our behalf. But we forget that most of the other technologies we use have artificial intelligence embedded in them in very rudimentary ways. For example, most of the modern microwaves have artificial intelligence embedded in them. If you want to defrost fish, You don't have to read the manual to say, I need to defrost fish. This is the power rating I need to put on my microwave. And for 500 grams of fish, this is how long I need to do it. You just press a button, and it works. And sometimes it has ways of sensing whether the fish is getting cooked when you wanted it to defrost, and it lowers the temperature accordingly. And those are some of the things that we do in technology sometimes without realizing. So let's go now to educational technology. What is it? Did it start with IT or electronics? I don't think so. Because if you were to look at electronics, they are a relatively new addition to the technologies that we've used. As a matter of fact, I think electronics came about in the 1950s. So it's a relatively new technology. But does that mean before 1950, people are not using technology in education? Were our great-grandparents using technology in education? So what sort of technology were they using? And how can we define that technology so that when we start talking about learning with technology, we at least know what we're talking about? And I think that's where I'll start the discussion today. Let's look at how we define technology, and then see how a specific derivative of the technologies that are there, that's electronic technologies, can be used in learning. I'm trying to avoid teaching as much as possible, but please take, when I say learning, I might be including teaching in that. So, okay, I see it's not working. Let me see there. I start by looking at technology for education. It's a way of systematizing what we want to transmit. How do we create a system that transmits the knowledge that we have, or we claim to have as experts, to those who don't have the knowledge, or to those that we intend to transmit the information to? And once we've systematized it, how do we create a practical approach of making sure that we transmit it? So if we see technology as a means of systematizing the knowledge that we already have and then transmitting it in a practical way, and I think I should emphasize the practicality here. It must be practical. It's not something that we, especially in academia, just theorize about. It has to be a way that we actually do so that we teach, or rather, we enhance or encourage effective learning. So when we talk about then educational technology, it's looking at all those issues that are eminent in the education or learning. And they include tools and resources. How do we gather the right tools and resources? How do we create approaches and even processes and methodologies for effective learning? When I teach, especially beginners, first year, I ask them what is information technology, as probably most of us educators ask at the beginning of every lesson. And in most cases, fresh from high school, they think, okay, technology is or technologies are the tangible things that we see. But then I tell them there can't be any technology without processes and without the people. So we see technology as a triad of the processes, the tools, and the people involved. And once we create a good synergy in the three, then we have effectiveness in the use of the particular technologies that we're talking about. And therefore, when we talk about electronic technologies, we're talking about specifically digitally enabled technologies that we can use in teaching and learning. And if we have that particular understanding, then we can proceed to the next part of my presentation. But before that, let's look at a brief history of digital, or rather technology in education, or educational technologies per se. Many years ago, certainly I wasn't born then, we relied on oral communication. Our forefathers and foremothers, I might say, relied on oral communication to teach their generations. As a matter of fact, most of what was written was passed on through word of mouth. So I can imagine at that time the technologies that existed was those of people who were good in rhetorics. They were good orators and had very good memory. And therefore, whatever I would imagine, any technology they were using for teaching is to enhance the memory of the people they are teaching. But then we moved on with the discovery of text and writing. And from that, we extended a bit. And I would imagine that's when we started having logicians. People who could probably talk and write for long and trying to link ideas, criticize them, and in a less subjective way, come to a conclusion. And I could imagine probably that's when we also started having lawyers. And then, quite recent, probably in the 1920s to 1940s, we had the issue of audio. And at this time, it's when, as a human race, we just discovered that we could transmit terrestrial signals. And we had radio and TV. Of course, with that, we had the issue of broadcasting, and we had the dream at that time of bombarding people with information, claiming we were teaching. And we saw it, actually, at that time. I wasn't there, but I think the human race saw it as a way of using technology then to reach as many people as possible. But then, since the 1950s, the digital technology came in. And with digital here, we see the computer power rising, the affordability of it. And I think this is when actually audiovisual in its best was realized for teaching and learning. But it was also with a few challenges. And some of those were, for example, the issue of cost. It was very expensive in the 80s and certainly in the 70s to own these digital technologies. But that changed since the 2000s, and the prices have gone down. And it's during that time, or during the that era, especially after 2000, that we started discussing about the animal called e-learning more, and we started thinking about even some form of innovation that were being put into whatever existed in the computers. And mainly, we saw the rise of management. And that's where we have learning management systems coming up. And related to that, we started seeing discussion on how do we personalize learning to take care of different learning needs of the learners. Now, we are at a position where things have changed a bit, and there are things or technological advances that are happening that we need to take care of and think about as we start designing the next frontier of learning technologies. And I've had colleagues who've used social media for teaching. Suddenly, I've seen people using Twitter and Facebook groups for teaching. And the use of social media, where do we go next? Is social media the blueprint for collaborative learning? And is that the future of collaborative learning? I don't have the answer to that question, but I could imagine that if we build in other forms of social learning, collaborative learning, we could, at least in one of the bearings of the huge engine of digital technologies for learning, do something. But then there are other things, although I said earlier that we use some of the technology without actually realizing. We've used AI without realizing, but the advances in that field need some future attention or attention. We have our VR boxes. How can we use them for effective learning? What are the opportunities? And that's what I'll be focusing on for the future and try to see or to link the opportunities of what these technologies present with what we're likely to see in the future. And towards the end, I'll end up with my notes on what I think should be our take home from my discussion. So, somebody from the World Economic Forum decided to name these technologies as the fourth industrial revolution. And with the fourth industrial revolution, what we're saying is it's something that no one really understands at the moment because it's still emerging. But it has a hallmark of some things, or rather there are ingredients that must be there. And one of the ingredients is highly interconnected objects. So we have many interconnected objects, and by objects here I mean both physical and biological. And with that then, there's a blur between what we consider to be digital and physical and biological. So if we think of these demarcations and the blurring demarcations, what do they mean? What would they mean for education? If, for argument's sake, we are operating at the intersection of the three spheres, what does that mean for us? How has that changed our lives? And that signs that our lives will be changed, and I'm hoping that the change that we want with the technology or being brought by these technologies is what we want or wish for our generations. Just before the Carl Schwab of the World Economic Forum came out with the fourth industrial revolution concept, about a year or so before that, Brian Johnston and McAfee had talked about the second machine age. And in this second machine age, they were looking at the revolutionary aspects of the technologies that we're using. And what they said at that point is that the technology advances are so high that they are not only automating what we do, they're also replacing our cognitive work. And if that's the future, that is, we'll have computers or electronic technologies that replace how we think and probably do it better than we can, what will be our role? What will we be doing then if we have technologies that are so good in cognitive work that can replace most of the cognitive work that we do? I think, and that's where we should start our discussion. What are the opportunities that are presented by that? If I can relegate some of my cognitive workload to a machine, I would gladly do that. And then I'll take that extra time to be creative and innovative in other areas. And I think that's what we are called for as educators. Once we start using this technology and we can relegate some of the work to the technology, like Prof said, if we can have the students learning every hour, irrespective of hour of day, with the technology, and releases some of our time, what do we do with the extra time that we have? And can we be more creative? Can we be more innovative? Actually, it's been shown, back to the course I was teaching in technology and society, it's been shown that even with increasing technology, people become busier. You don't become, or you don't have more time now that you can have the microwave warm your food instead of going to light fire or collect firewood to come and light your food. You don't have less time if you use piped water, or rather, you don't have more time if you use piped water because you're no longer going to fetch water from the river. So there's a way that the technology creates more work for us. And my wish is that the more work it creates is in the creativity or the creative and innovative domain on how we could use, especially us in the educational field, for teaching and learning. So the questions are, okay, first we'll look at the technologies that are shaping the fourth industrial revolution. I'll not tackle all. I'll just tackle a selection of those that I think have the biggest impact in the technology, in educational technology. Then I will try to see how do we prepare ourselves as teachers to use these technologies. And finally, although in a muted way, look at some of the responses that we need at socioeconomic and political levels to use these technologies, or at least to take advantage of some of them. I talked earlier about the first driver, Internet of Things. And Internet of Things, or Internet of Objects, or Internet of Physical Objects, or interconnected objects are the many things that are interconnected to the internet. And it's been projected that the growth is exponential, and at one given time, you will have, as an individual, more than 100 interconnected objects in your body. So, yes, that's in your body alone. So, what are we talking about here? Of course, at the moment, we are using some of those things. You have, for some of us who are, what are we called? Exercise fanatics. We have our smart watches, and they measure almost everything. I have a smartwatch that measures how much cholesterol, or rather, how much fat I burnt in any exercise. I don't know how accurate that is. And immediately after the exercise, it connects to the internet, uploads to a profile, and tells me how well I'm doing in my exercise regime. You could imagine that, for example, if you have a heart pacer connected to that watch, connected to your phone, that communicates directly to whoever you've selected, if it's your medical practitioner, to monitor how you're doing. And it could be many connections, and I will talk about some of those shortly. So if we're talking about that rate of interconnection, what can we do as educators using IoT, or interconnected objects? So some of the things we could use is think, if I could use technology, and by looking at my screen here, I could see who is bored, or I could see who's lost interest, and with a click of a button, I could trigger something that could create interest when I'm learning, or when I'm facilitating. That would be nice. We are not there yet, but we might get there. But if we could have those interconnectedness, and we know, for example, that as a facilitator here, that a concept is difficult for students to understand, by just looking at something here on my screen when I'm facilitating, that would really help me in improving how I facilitate. And of course, we could use similar technology for monitoring. If we could give, say, the VR boxes to students, and we see how they're learning, see their brain impulses, and see whether they're actually learning, and we can monitor that, that would be even better than any form of formal assessment. Because at the end of the day, my happiness, or the aim of my facilitation, is to make sure that the students learn. And if that could remove the need for me to actually have a formal assessment by just monitoring the triggers from the sensors in your body, and they tell me that you've actually learned, then that would be fantastic. And finally, we could start looking at ways of developing third-party applications. What are the third-party applications that we can use to embed with the technologies that we have to measure or to facilitate learning? Of course, there are some things that are in advanced area of research when it comes to IoT. So one of the widely used are the hearing aids. I don't know whether people consider them as IoT devices, but they are actually IoT devices embedded in your biological system to help you with hearing. So when we talk about these devices, just think of some of the practical things that exist. And the advances there are in mind-reading technologies, and especially in the treatment of those diseases like Parkinson's. We've seen a lot of research there. What we should be aware of as educators are the spin-offs. If we can identify some of the triggers in the human brain that, say, cause boredom, that cause perception or influence perception, how do we then, instead of, for example, in the clinical use, we're using them to treat Alzheimer's or Parkinson, how do we use them to change the perception about learning? Would it indeed be good, for example, if in the future you're teaching mathematics? I'm told that mathematics is perceived to be the most difficult subject. And you could almost engineer a change of perception amongst your students, and they could learn mathematics better. Of course, most of the research at the moment in that field of interconnected devices in the brain are in the medical field. But the spin-offs mean a lot for us in education. And it's a field that I'd like us to be watching, especially those of us who teach some of the most difficult subjects. Then there is the issue of big data. And with big data is the data we're just producing, or the data that these interconnected objects are producing. I usually ask when I'm facilitating a lesson on big data, how much data do you think your cell phone provider has about you by just walking around with your phone? In one day. That's data you involuntarily give, unaware that you're doing it, but it's a lot of data. Probably your cell phone in one day produces around 1 gigabyte of data that if your cell phone company provider wants to store, can store. What would mean if we collect all that data about our learners and use it to improve the way we teach or the way they learn? So there are ways we could do that, and I will look at some of them. First, we could look at our educational value chain. And what's our educational value chain? We accept students, in most cases from matric, and we take them through a process of cooking, and then at the end of 3 or 4 years, we say they're well cooked and we can release them to the market. Of course, I'm using cooking figuratively, but there are aspects in our educational value chain that can be better if we rely on the data that we can get. So how do we use the data that can be generated? For example, would it be nice if by the time we admit a student, we know for a fact some of the social issues that affect a student's progress, covering the last 17 years of the student's life. And then when we have those, we can be able to better respond to the psychosocial support that we give to the student. And if you give that support, then we're improving learning. So those are some of the things that could be available with the big data. The challenge is we don't have access to most of the data about our students. Actually, I think, under correction, by law, we are only allowed to use matric results to admit students, and probably we can use the extracurricular achievements, but I'm not so sure about that. But it would indeed be nice, even if we use the results, we get the background data and use it to model way of improving our student support services. So on big data, I think we have some opportunities. And some of them are, how do we benchmark? If we have the data, we can be able to properly benchmark. I was talking to Saki, who will be presenting later, and with learning analytics, for example, we could be able to see how our learners are faring. And if we could combine the data on learning for a student based on the interactions the students have had with all the modules or subjects they are taking, then we are better off in making informed decisions on how to support the learner better. And we could also probably stop offering what would be obsolete qualifications or obsolete competencies. Do we actually know, for example, what would be the most likely skills needed by the industry 5 years from now? Of course, most of the skills report that I've seen, they're talking about creativity, social competencies, and using technology. But is that for sure? Can we say that? Do we have the data to support that? And of course, the other things that we could do within the educational value chain with the big data that we have. I won't go through all of them, but we could analyze so much data that, to make decisions on how even we run our universities. Then, I think I will leave this for the next session coming. There's the virtual and augmented reality. The difference is, in one, you've completely blocked your world. In the other, you're engaging with the world and adding items. I'm sure most of you have played Pokemon Go. Anyone who hasn't? Yes? I haven't, I must confess, but I've seen my son play it, so I know how it works. And this is an opportunity that is coming, or it's been there for quite some time, but its uptake has been slow. And of course, the uptake has been slow because some of the issues that are difficult to address is the availability of content, or availability of content designers, and of course the technology and the technological mix that is required to run the AR, VR. But what it has an ability to scale. Once you create, for example, a simple video on how you approach, say, farming, and how you prepare your land, and you could do that by virtual reality, you could send it to many learners, and they could engage with that. And with that, you could easily change context. And especially with augmented reality, the context defines what additional elements you see. And that would be beneficial for some teaching. And the other things, we could send students to places without them leaving their physical space. And I've seen this work in our highly immersive virtualized environment, where geologists are taken into space they can't go because of either risk or cost, but they're able to see things underground. If you want to see how you drill for oil in the ocean, in the middle of the ocean, using the Hive, they can actually go to the ocean, have the experience of drilling oil in the ocean, and learn quite a lot on how it works. And again, the challenge is always how to create the content. That's the challenge. It's not the technology. The technology is there. How do we, as educators, as technologists, if we want to call ourselves technologists, create the right content for those students to learn? Of course, there is the other view, and this is artificial intelligence. And with artificial intelligence, we're just talking about computers or objects that mimic us as humans. And I think this has been a phase of heated discussion. I think there was a discussion last week between Jack Ma of Alibaba and who was he discussing with? Elon Musk of Tesla. And the discussion here mainly are those who see the doom of using AI or artificial intelligence in anything, and those who see opportunities. So on one side, I think Elon Musk thinks that we should control the use of AI, and Jack Ma on the other side sees we should actually embrace AI and see what it brings. So, but what does it mean to have machines that can learn, that can reason, that can self-correct? Do we really need humans? Because that has been our fault. We're human because we can learn, we can reason, we can self-correct. Or are we human because we think we do those things, but we don't? So it's an interesting field. And the challenge here is always, if we are to look at that, we are actually reducing the time it takes to learn. How long does it take to educate a PhD? If that person goes throughout the educational system without a break, probably we're looking at 27, 26 years. What if we can shorten that time of learning using algorithms to 3 years, to 4 years? Just a few weeks ago, I saw news of AI programs that have defeated humans in the most difficult board games, AlphaGo. What does that mean? Again, it's AlphaGo, it's probably a board game. Although it has infinite moves, we at least know the rules of the moves. But what would that mean? Recently, I watched a movie called I Am Mother. Anyone who has watched that movie? So in that movie, it's a rush. I think the gist of the movie, let me just go. Or should I do that, or you want to go and watch it? So the gist is, what if we have computers that want to save humanity, to save humanity from itself? Or will we reach a point where we want to save humanity or ourselves from us? So the real reason that probably we should be looking out for that, I've been signaled that I need to move on, so then I just need to move quickly so that I can go to the final conclusion where I think most of the discussion should be. Then there is, what do we, if we embed the intelligence and the cognition to moving bodies, to robotics? What does that mean? At this level, I've seen a robot that can do backflips. That was difficult a few years ago. Now we have those. And if we can improve mobility, what does that mean? So I think there are a few things that we could look at. And with robotics and AI, we could start looking at automating marking of scripts. I think every educator would agree that that's something that we need to do, probably SAP. We could possibly have robot tutors. I'm sure you've logged on to some banks or sites that have chat boxes. So what would that mean? For example, if a student asks a question and a robot answers the question, when you're still sleeping or being engaged in other creative and innovative work. And what if in the background, the computer is looking at the way the student is engaging with the content and varying the depth and difficulty of the subject without you knowing, so that it generates or gathers additional content for the student so that the student can understand what the concepts are. What if we get our own personalized professors? And I think it might look far, but it's a possibility that we might wake up one day and realize it's there. And of course, how does that change us and our roles? Do we still work with yellow fading notes to class? Or do we move on with the times? The other thing that we need to consider is 3D printing or additive manufacturing. And with 3D printing, here we're just looking at creating some artifacts on the spot. If you want a student to experience something, say you're teaching chemistry, and you want the student to experience some of the elements that we're talking about, I think in chemistry, the most difficult aspect for me was trying to figure out the concept of molecules. And if I could see that printed and I'm shown a 3D image of the molecules, probably I would have understood that topic better. And the use here again is endless. From medicine, a few months ago, I went to our dental school, and the fixing of dentures is being done by 3D printing. They take your X-ray, take photos of a 3D photo of your mouth, feed the information in the computer, model it, and generate your dentures. A process that used to take ages with trial and error now takes less than a day. So what would that mean when we're teaching? And of course, there are other things that look a bit weird, like 3D printed food. You just have to download the ingredients or the templates for dinner and just print it out. I think those are interesting time, but we are not there yet, or rather, the technology is there, but I'm not so sure I want 3D printed food yet. So what do we do? I think there are things that have happened, and I think, and so some of the tensions that we're seeing, even in society today, as a result of some of these issues. For example, there's the issue of industrial capitalism, where we're seeing those who have capital are moving or accumulating more capital at the expense of the population. What's the net worth of, say, Amazon, Google, NASPA, compared to the others? Actually, yesterday I was reading in the Kenyan newspaper, the biggest cell phone provider, Safaricom, now has over 50% of the stock market value. What does that mean to the general population who don't have, if the wealth of the nation is going to those who are technologically and with technology and the capital. Then there is issue of under or unemployment. What would that mean? If I'm being trained today as a programmer, and then we have probably computers that can program better than I, what will I do? And there are other questions of economic insecurity, wars and terrorism, and even urban slums that we're dealing with. So to us in higher education, I think we need to look at a future dominated by robots. I think it's inevitable. And therefore, when we teach or teach with technology, we teach with the knowledge that we might be teaching people for skills that will be obsolete in 10 to 15 years. And therefore, that might require us to change the way we teach and the way we teach those people to integrate themselves with the technologies. And how do we prepare ourselves, because this will come, or if it hasn't, where we see students coming back and telling us, whatever you offered to me was not good enough. I've seen signs of that on LinkedIn, where I think 2 weeks ago I saw a student from one of our universities displaying all the certificates he's had and claiming after paying all that fees, getting all these certificates, he is still unemployed. What would be our response to that? And what do we need to do? Of course, in the reports by the risk, or the jobs that are at risk of automation or the IT, there are quite a number, and some of these we find them even in our universities. Certainly at UWC, we're still training accountants, and would there be accountants required in the future? And many others. I think I have a link to that. But the issue here is, do we actually start looking at what we are offering and try to project how we offer it or what we need to change? The other aspect, and I think this is where most of our efforts should also be, is that most of us, even when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, some of us have not experienced the first industrial revolution. So if we say the first industrial revolution was where engines replaced most of the manual work that we did, women in our rural villages are still going to fetch firewood by using their bodies and carrying them on their backs. They don't have, so many people don't have electricity. So how do we deal with that? Even before we come to the access of the internet that connecting those. And if we already seeing defranchised people because of the perception they did not have the things they need, then we are heading to troubled time. So I think I'll skip this because I've been signaled now for the fourth time. I think my time is up. But safe to say that we should be concerned about things to do with privacy and security. I mentioned that we generate more data than we know on our phones, and certainly our students will generate more data than they are willing to give to us when they interact with us. And then there's the responsible use of particular technology that we have, and we must ensure that we maintain the highest level of ethics. And I think towards the use of technology, it's more of trying to leverage what is there. I think we could start small, and there are things that we could do almost immediately. We don't need to buy expensive technology. There are technologies that are already there. For example, cloud computing. And we could empower educators not only on the use of the technologies, but how to use them effectively for teaching and learning. And the others are looking at the issues of security and ethics. And do I still have time? Oh, it's over. Yeah. Just sum it up. Okay. So let me see. Okay, let me see whether there's one more thing that I might need to say. I didn't know in Durban 1 hour is too short. Yes. Okay. So I think just to mention, I think I'll go to the pedagogical issues here. And I think mainly here is to look at how do we align all these technologies with what we want our students to achieve at the end of the day, and how we allocate the teaching resources for the kind of teaching that we want. And of course, on the technology field, and I hope we'll get that time is mentioned to elaborate on these things. On the technology side, there are always issues. We will not have all the capital we need to do what we want to do. There will be issues of content, and there are also issues of integration with other technologies that we currently use, that we're dying not to abandon, and we must support. I'll leave it there, and I thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I wish we could think really hard on how we could devise means, use technology such that that which is supposed to be covered in an hour, that which could be covered in 5 hours, as you have seen here, could be covered within an hour. So we gotta think really. Quite very interesting points Doc is making here, and we can't cover all of them, but I wish we could engage him with 1 or 2 questions, maximum of 2 questions, if questions, or 2 comments, if comments. I'll note hands. In any event, there's gonna be panel. Oh, is there a hand at the back? Oh, there is one. Okay, let me note that hand. Note it. Any other? So that I know. Okay, we're just gonna there's another one over there. Okay, only those 2. You start, sir. Introduce yourself, then you go ahead, make your comment or ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Rafiq from MUT, Mangosuthu University of Technology, for those who don't know. I just want to congratulate the speaker on taking us through this journey from simple communication right up to complicated and complex stuff like robotics and AI and stuff like that. But there are some fascinating questions that you have raised, and actually I'm very scared now. And I'm truly scared for 2 reasons. One, if we are agents of a system which is driving profit, which is that whole marketization, massification, and all of that stuff, and if we are agents of that system and we are driving profits, then we are creating the next generation of people who are going to be creating all kinds of technologies, making life easier, systematizing, and then we're going to be decentered. We're going to lose our status. As we have already seen, as parents, we are irrelevant now. When you sit on the table to eat, what are your children doing? Are they communicating with you? Number 1. We're going to lose our status as lovers, because what are our lovers doing? Late at night, in the secrecy of private hours and in the dark, they're sitting in front of that screen and they're having far more meaningful and sensual activities. Number 3, at the level of employment. What are our employers doing? They are putting in robots and we are losing our jobs. And that is a small snapshot of the effects of such technology. And that's, of course, the bad side. The good side is our responsibility. And I think this is where our responsibility starts, is as educators, how can we ensure that we make human beings the center rather than robots at the center? Instead of creating humans out of robots, I would rather think that can't we enhance our own human qualities?
Wow, so many questions, so many questions.
I'll stop there. Okay.
All right. I think you noted those down. Let me give you a chance to ask your question. Introduce yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you very much to our chair. I'm actually going to cede my question because I think that the gentleman, Rafiq, has raised some challenging issues. Perhaps my comment on it is, in a grossly unequal society where we are the consumers of technology and the data generators rather than the data owners or users, what would you suggest, James, is that we actually need to teach our children, we need to teach our students? I'm going to stop there.
What would you suggest?
Okay, so...
All right. You don't necessarily have to answer all the questions because you are going to have a discussion hereafter. Yes. Otherwise, we're pressed against time.
Okay,
One or two, then we go.
I think one slide that I removed here, and it was a responsibility that we have. And you've articulated it quite eloquently, the responsibility that we have. One of the responsibility that we must take is being engaged. We can't afford to be disengaged. And with engagement, I say, if, for example, you're not engaging with your kids at the dinner table, then clearly you can't blame the technology. Okay, the second thing is, in that slide that's not here, is being political. We must be political on the future. We must start looking at the issues of employment. What would happen if the job as I know it today is being done by a robot tomorrow? And the last point in that slide is being human. Remember, after all, we are human. What makes us human? What makes you human? And I think that's the most important and the central part of it. How do we teach our kids to be human first, as even when they interact with these devices? Do you tell them, for example, it's food time, and the technology is not assisting you to digest the food yet, so you have to concentrate? Do you tell them it's not technology time, it's family time now, and we need a face-to-face discussion? Or what kind of engagement, political reasoning, and humanity do you want to express to the younger generation? Thank you.
All right, quite a challenge, folks. You just got to think, how do you remain human amidst so much technology? Thank you very much. So we're going to break for tea, and we'll come back. We'll continue. We're going to engage him further through our panel discussion. And by the time we come back, I'm not going to be chairing leading proceedings. Somebody's going to take over. Thank you very much.